In a quiet corner of London's suburbs, the Whitmore estate stood tall amidst a blooming rose garden. Inside, Lady Eleanor Whitmore, a young, arrogant debutante, stood before a grand mirror, adjusting her dazzling diamond necklace, a custom-made piece worth enough to buy a small town. Looking out over the garden, Eleanor spotted Maggie Blythe, her loyal maid, tending to the rose bushes. At 30, Maggie retained a quiet elegance, despite the laborious work she performed daily. This irked Eleanor, stirring a subtle jealousy within her. Maggie, that rustic woman. Eleanor muttered with a sly smile. Why not give her a taste of the high life? A little jest might add some excitement to this year's party. Eleanor's birthday celebration was the highlight of the social calendar, attracting the city's wealthiest and most influential figures. But this year, Eleanor wanted to add a spectacle, with Maggie as the unwitting centerpiece. A maid completely out of place in a sea of aristocracy. That afternoon, Eleanor strolled into the garden, a feigned gentleness in her demeanor. "Maggie, I need a word with you," she said. Maggie looked up, her hands covered in soil, but her face radiating a genuine smile. "Yes, Lady Eleanor, how may I help you?" "I've decided to invite you to my birthday party this week," Eleanor declared, her tone dripping with condescension. "You'll be the special guest." Maggie's eyes widened in surprise, but she quickly replied, "I'm honored, miss, but I'm not sure I belong there." "Don't worry, Maggie," Eleanor said with a cold smile. "I'll handle everything, from your dress to the details. All you need to do is attend." Drawn by curiosity and her loyalty, Maggie agreed, oblivious that she was stepping into the first act of a cruel scheme. As the party drew near, Eleanor meticulously finalized her elaborate plan. Every detail, from the guest list to the floral arrangements, was designed to ensure her glory. This time, though, she aimed to dazzle in a way that would outshine all her previous soirees. Eleanor entered the study, where B. Hamilton, her shrewd and reserved assistant, was engrossed in her tasks. B. looked up as Eleanor approached, immediately sensing a hint of mischief in her employer's smile. It wasn't the warm smile Eleanor was known for, but rather one of calculated malice. "B, I need you to find a dress, something special," Eleanor said, emphasizing the final word with a mischievous lilt. "Special in what way, ma'am?" B asked, placing her pen down and meeting Eleanor's gaze. "For Maggie," Eleanor replied casually, though her eyes glinted with icy intent. "A dress that will make her stand out. Truly stand out." B hesitated, her mind racing with possibilities. Maggie? The humble maid? And a luxurious event? It didn't add up, but she dared not question. She waited as Eleanor continued. Eleanor leaned back, her fingers brushing the hem of her silk dress. "Find something ridiculous. Perhaps a pale lavender gown, with garish embellishments, like oversized bows or frills. Make sure it's at least a decade out of style." B blinked, momentarily stunned, but quickly masked her surprise. "Are you certain, Lady Eleanor? A dress like that might look quite—" "Oh." Eleanor chuckled, the sound like shards of glass. "Precisely, B. I want her to be the center of attention, but not in the way she imagines." The next morning, B returned with the dress. It was everything Eleanor had envisioned. A pale lavender monstrosity with voluminous skirts, oversized ribbons, and thick layers of outdated ruffles. Eleanor held the gown up, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Perfect. she murmured. When Maggie received the dress, her eyes widened. For a moment she seemed puzzled, but then she smiled warmly. "You're so thoughtful, Lady Eleanor. I never expected you to be so generous." Eleanor smiled back, this time with a facade of sweetness. "It's nothing, Maggie. You deserve this." Maggie clutched the dress, grateful for what she perceived as a gesture of kindness, unaware she was a pawn in Eleanor's cruel game. As Maggie left, Eleanor's eyes darkened with a malevolent gleam. "This is only the beginning," she whispered, her lips curling into a sinister smile as the morning sunlight cast long shadows in the room, emphasizing the duality of her radiant exterior and the darkness within. That evening, Claridge's Hotel, a symbol of London's opulence, shone brightly under the golden glow of its grand chandeliers. The red carpet was rolled out, and a procession of Rolls-Royces and Bentleys lined the entrance. Guests, dressed in their finest, stepped out with the poise of performers on a grand stage. Eleanor, draped in a crimson satin gown, emerged from her car with regal poise. Behind her, Maggie stepped out in a lavender gown. The world seemed to pause for a moment. The dress, with its absurdly outdated style and gaudy details, made Maggie appear as though she had wandered out of a comedic period play. All eyes turned toward her, whispers rippling through the crowd. Maggie, striving to remain composed, followed Eleanor into the grand hall. The air inside was filled with the scent of expensive perfumes and the lively chatter of the city's elite. Gentlemen sipped champagne while ladies exchanged sharp smiles over delicate compliments. "This is Maggie Blythe," Eleanor announced to the first group of friends they encountered, her smile tinged with mockery. "She's turned my garden into a paradise. I thought she deserved to see high society at least once." Maggie smiled politely, though her eyes betrayed an inner tremor. Each chuckle and lingering gaze felt like a needle pricked to her pride. She felt like a doll on display, each look a judgment, each laugh a verdict. Yet, deep down, Maggie resolved not to let Eleanor's scheme succeed. Sensing Maggie's unease, Eleanor led her to other groups, each introduction a veiled jab. "She's so talented, isn't she? But tonight, I wanted her to step out of the garden and into the spotlight. Who knows? Perhaps she has a knack for mingling with aristocrats, too." Maggie nodded and smiled graciously, though she felt like she was being torn apart inside. At one point, a slightly tipsy man laughed aloud. "Miss Maggie, isn't it? How delightful to see someone like you at such an event. Any advice for us on rose care, perhaps?" The question landed like a public taunt, drawing laughter from the group. Maggie, still smiling gently, replied, "Caring for roses requires love and patience, sir. But sometimes it's necessary to prune the dead branches for the plant to thrive." Her response silenced the man momentarily, but instead of diffusing the situation, it seemed to deepen Eleanor's irritation. Dragging Maggie away, Eleanor prepared to unveil the next phase of her plan. Yet Maggie, sensing a shift within herself, straightened her posture. She was no longer the passive victim in Eleanor's cruel game. As Maggie stepped forward with a calm determination, a quiet storm began brewing in her gaze, one that Eleanor had not anticipated, a storm that would upend the night entirely. The lively birthday party, filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses, came to an abrupt pause as the grand doors slowly opened. A commanding presence seemed to flow into the room, silencing all chatter, until a profound hush blanketed the gathering. Lord Jonathan Armitage entered, exuding an aura of effortless authority. The chandelier's crystal lights reflected off his impeccably tailored suit. Simple, yet sophisticated, embodying a man whose influence required no ostentation. His piercing eyes scanned the room, as if they could unearth every hidden truth. The guests froze in place, their movements stilled by the weight of his arrival, a stark reminder of values lost amidst their opulent surroundings. But then, his gaze stopped, not on Eleanor, nor on any other prominent figure, but on Maggie Blythe. His expression softened into a blend of surprise and warmth. "Miss Maggie Blythe," he spoke in a deep, resonant voice that shattered the silence like a bell tolling across the room. "It's an honor to see you again." His words rippled through the gathering like a stone tossed into still water. Whispers erupted among the guests, their astonishment evident. Why would Lord Armitage, known to associate only with society's elite, acknowledge a maid? Maggie stood frozen for a moment before bowing her head slightly, her eyes reflecting deep respect. "It is a pleasure to see you again, Lord Armitage," she replied softly but steadily, as though greeting an old acquaintance. Eleanor stood rooted to the spot, her entire body stiffened as if paralyzed by a moment she could neither anticipate nor control. Her mind raced to make sense of the scene. Maggie, the maid she had always dismissed, somehow knew Lord Jonathan Armitage, one of the most influential figures in English society? This cannot be, Eleanor thought, her breathing quickening. Her eyes darted to Maggie, a mixture of suspicion and confusion swirling within them. Lord Armitage moved closer, his face adorned with a kind smile. "You haven't changed, Maggie. Humble as ever, yet your presence remains undeniable." The murmurs among the guests grew louder. Curious glances and speculative whispers flew across the room like wildfire. Who is Maggie? Does Lord Armitage know her? Isn't she just a maid? Unable to bear the escalating mystery, Eleanor forced herself to maintain her composure. She stepped forward, her voice sugar-coated but laced with doubt. "Lord Armitage, it seems you and Maggie are already acquainted." "No," Lord Armitage turned to Eleanor, his gaze penetrating, as though he had already unraveled her thoughts. His smile remained, but it carried an undertone of warning. "Yes, Lady Eleanor," he replied, his tone polite yet commanding. "Maggie is not just someone I know, but someone I hold in the highest regard." The room fell into stunned silence once more. All eyes shifted to Maggie, who stood calm and composed, though her eyes harbored a deep, unspoken pain. Eleanor's facade cracked. She forced a strained smile, though anxiety seeped through every pore. She felt her meticulously crafted game slipping from her grasp. Lord Armitage turned back to Maggie, his voice softening with compassion. "Maggie, I believe it's time for the truth. You no longer need to hide who you are." Eleanor's world crumbled around her. What truth? Who is Maggie? The unanswered questions churned within her, threatening to unravel her. After a moment's quiet contemplation, Maggie raised her head. Determination shone in her eyes, and a faint smile graced her lips. "If you believe now is the time, I won't decline." The room collectively held its breath, bracing for a revelation no one could have foreseen. A storm was brewing, but this time it was not Eleanor's game. It was Maggie's truth, ready to shatter the illusion. Lord Jonathan Armitage stepped forward, his voice deep and resonant, cutting through the stillness like a symphony awakening dormant emotions. Many of you may not know, but Miss Maggie Blythe is no ordinary maid. She was once one of the most brilliant visionaries I have ever had the privilege of meeting. The room fell silent again, every whisper extinguished in anticipation of his story. Lord Armitage's gaze rested on Maggie, a mixture of pride and sorrow in his eyes. He continued, his tone imbued with heartfelt reverence. She is a woman who used her personal fortune and expertise to transform thousands of lives. But after a tragic loss, she chose to leave it all behind, living a quiet life of service under a name you may have heard before, the Hidden Angel. A collective gasp rippled through the room, and the guests' astonished eyes turned to Maggie. Yet Lord Armitage was not finished. His voice grew heavier, laden with emotion. I still remember the day she came to me, only weeks after a horrific tragedy took everything she held dear. A devastating car accident on a foggy road in Cornwall claimed her entire family. Her parents, who were so proud of her, and her younger sister, a bright, promising girl of only 16, were all lost that night. Maggie was the sole survivor. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. Many guests instinctively covered their mouths, their eyes brimming with sympathy. She lost everything in that moment, yet instead of succumbing to despair, she turned her grief into action. She sold her family's entire estate and dedicated the proceeds to charitable causes. As the Hidden Angel, she built schools, hospitals, and restored hope to countless families. Lord Armitage's gaze swept across the crowd, finally settling on Eleanor's stunned face. His lips curved into a faint smile, but his voice carried a pointed edge. She chose humility. She found joy in tending gardens and helping others. It's a humility I believe many in this room would do well to learn. Eleanor's face burned with humiliation as the weight of every gaze fell on her. They no longer looked at her with admiration, but with judgment. She turned to Maggie, who stood serene, her expression unwavering and resolute. A voice broke the silence, trembling with emotion. "Maggie, why didn't you tell anyone? Why live this way?" Maggie stepped forward, standing beside Lord Armitage. Her voice was gentle but firm, carrying the strength of someone who had made peace with her pain. "I didn't want anyone to see me as a wealthy woman or a victim. I wanted them to see what I could do, not what I had lost. Every day, I find purpose, not to forget my pain, but to transform it into hope. I find joy in the blooming of flowers, just as I find hope in the lives I've helped mend. It's the only way I know to keep moving forward." The room was silent once more. A woman wept quietly in a corner, while a gentleman turned away, struggling to suppress a sigh of emotion. Eleanor, meanwhile, felt a crushing weight settled in her chest. Her schemes, her malice, all laid bare and rendered meaningless in the face of Maggie's grace. Lord Armitage placed a hand on Maggie's shoulder, his smile now full of admiration. "You are not just the Hidden Angel, Maggie. You are a testament to resilience and compassion, qualities this world sorely needs." Applause erupted, hesitant at first, but quickly growing into a thunderous ovation. Maggie bowed her head in gratitude, her eyes shimmering, but dry. Eleanor stood apart, tears streaming down her face. Quietly, she stepped toward Maggie, her voice trembling. "Maggie, I am so sorry. I was wrong, and I don't know how to make it right." Maggie turned to Eleanor, her gaze devoid of anger. Instead, her hand rested gently on Eleanor's shoulder, her voice imbued with forgiveness. "Forgiveness isn't what you need, Eleanor. What you need is change. Let your actions from today onward reflect the person you want to become, not the one you've been." Eleanor nodded, tears spilling freely as Maggie's words became a guiding light, showing her the way out of her darkness. Maggie departed quietly, seeking no accolades, but in every heart she left behind a profound lesson. True greatness lies not in winning, but in inspiring others to find the light, even when they tried to extinguish it in you. Maggie returned to her quiet life, residing in a modest home on the edge of a serene village. Each morning, she tended to her garden, her calloused hands gently cradling the blooms, as though infusing them with love. But Maggie's peaceful existence did not equate to indifference. She silently continued her journey, driven by compassion and an unwavering desire to improve the lives of those around her. The story of Maggie, the woman who gave up everything to do good, spread far beyond the confines of that fateful party. Media outlets took notice. Headlines celebrated the hidden angel as a symbol of humble generosity. Yet Maggie declined every interview, every chance to step into the public eye. When a persistent journalist finally reached her, she simply said, "I don't do this for recognition. I do it because even the smallest action can transform someone's life. I don't want the spotlight of fame to overshadow the genuine values I strive to uphold." Instead, Maggie continued her charitable efforts in quiet dedication. She donated funds to build a primary school in a remote, impoverished village. She personally visited the site, spending time with the children, teaching them to cherish education and kindness. In a flood-stricken region, Maggie helped rebuild homes for families who had lost everything. When asked why she helped without asking for anything in return, Maggie smiled gently and replied, "Because I know what it feels like to lose everything. Sometimes, all a person needs is a place to start again." During a visit to an orphanage on the outskirts of London, Maggie brought not just gifts, but also her warm, reassuring presence. She sat with the children, telling them fairy tales and teaching them how to plant flowers in a small garden. To each child, she left a simple yet profound message. No matter where you grow up or what challenges you face, remember that you have the power to make the world better. Never doubt your worth. Maggie's actions didn't just change the lives of those she directly helped. They inspired countless others. A group of young entrepreneurs, moved by her story, established a charitable foundation called Maggie's Steps to continue her mission of supporting education and alleviating poverty. Even Eleanor, who had once wronged Maggie, underwent a transformation inspired by her example. Eleanor began participating in charity projects, not just donating money, but actively engaging in community work. One day, she visited Maggie with a pair of brand new gardening gloves and an awkward smile. "I want to learn how to care for flowers, Maggie," she said hesitantly. "Not just the ones in a garden, but the ones in my heart, too." Maggie smiled, welcoming her like an old friend. From then on, Eleanor often visited Maggie's garden, not just to work, but to learn how to cherish the simple, beautiful things in life. Maggie's story became a beacon of inspiration, not because of what she said, but because of what she did. She taught everyone, true happiness doesn't come from how much we own, but from how much we can give. A helping hand at the right time, a smile in the right place. Sometimes that's all it takes to change a life. Maggie never became a glamorous icon. She remained a humble woman with an extraordinary heart, and it was precisely this humility that made her story timeless, not just in written words, but in the hearts of everyone who heard it. Thank you for sharing this emotional journey with Maggie. We hope this story has touched your heart and reminded you that a person's true value lies not in what they possess, but in how they spread love and make a difference in others' lives. If this story sparked empathy or inspiration within you, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel to help us reach our first milestone of 1,000 subscribers. Your support drives us to continue bringing meaningful stories of kindness and human connection. See you in the next story.